Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sift through the noise, grab a stack of information, and really pull out the core insights for you. Today, we're plunging into a topic that gets a lot of airtime, sometimes debated, sometimes maybe misunderstood in its real potential: diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI. For this deep dive, we're looking closely at a really eye-opening article from the MIT Sloan Management Review. It's by Quinetta Robertson, called "How Integrating DEI into Strategyless Performance." Our goal here is to kind of shift how you might think about DEI, maybe from just a nice-to-have towards seeing it as a strategic must-have, something that can actually drive organizational effectiveness and, yes, financial performance.
Exactly. And what's really insightful, I think, about the source right off the bat is how it elevates the conversation. It's not just about addressing social inequities, though obviously that's crucial in the broader context. But here, DEI is framed as a tool, a powerful one, for tackling top leadership priorities. Things like, attracting and keeping talent, sparking innovation, motivating your teams, enhancing shareholder value. It really connects those dots.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit more, because I think many of us, our first thought might be DEI, okay, that's ethics, or maybe it's, some HR programs. But this research, it's making a pretty bold claim that it's a critical driver of core business results. How does it actually make that case?
Well, it's compelling because the research backs it up with a solid business case. I mean, previous studies had already pointed towards potential benefits, right? Like accessing new markets, more innovation, better employee engagement, that kind of thing. But here's where it gets really specific. The author's own newer study, done with Mackenzie Preston, looked at U.S. credit unions, and it found concrete evidence. It showed that taking a strategic approach, so where DEI isn't just tacked on, but it's actually woven into the core business processes, that approach is directly linked to better financial performance. We're talking measurable improvements in things like return on assets and net income.
Wow, okay. Return on assets and net income. That's significant.
It really is. It shifts the perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From maybe seeing DEI as a cost center to potentially a profit driver.
Definitely. So, all right, if a company wants to harness this, wants to use DEI to actually improve financial performance, what are the concrete steps, the actionable strategies from the research? It sounds like it has to be more than just, running a few workshops here and there.
Oh, absolutely. It's much deeper than that. The source really boils it down to three fundamental approaches, and importantly, they reinforce each other. First, you absolutely need a strategic approach to actually creating and maintaining diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments. This means DEI has to be part of the company's overall strategy.
Yep.
It needs to align with core business objectives, not just be siloed in HR for, say, recruitment or training. It's got to be in the DNA.
Okay, integrated into the main strategy.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What's the second part?
Second, the research suggests implementing sets of DEI practices that are all aimed at achieving similar goals. So while maybe one single practice could help with a specific outcome, like diversifying who applies for jobs, the real power comes from bundling. Enacting multiple reinforcing practices together towards a common goal seems to amplify the effects quite dramatically. That bundling is key.
Bundling. Interesting. Multiple practices working together. And the third?
And third, and this is crucial for making it stick, companies have to develop tools for measuring and evaluating the change that comes from DEI efforts. This isn't about just feeling good or, perception. It's about structured data collection. It means rigorously measuring how effective initiatives are, analyzing progress against actual DEI goals, and then using that data to make informed strategic decisions. You need to know what's working and why.
Right. Data-driven decisions, not just aspirations. Okay, so conceptually, that framework, strategic approach, bundling practices, measuring results makes sense. But let's get practical. For leaders listening, what does that strategic approach actually look like, on the ground? What specific things embed DEI into strategy and operations so it actually creates value?
Well, it often starts with something foundational, establishing a written DEI policy or a strategic plan. But here's the critical part. It must be explicitly aligned with core business functions, not just HR, but talent management across the board, product development, even how you engage with customers. It can't be a standalone document gathering dust. There was a great example from one study participant's corporate DEI strategy that really shows this integration. They talked about commitment to diversity and belonging, sure, but then immediately linked it to concrete actions, continuously improving the workplace, empowering employees through flexibility and collaboration, and tying all that directly to achieving higher individual engagement and ultimately better organizational outcomes. It becomes a blueprint for long-term value, not just a statement.
That sounds like a much more embedded operational approach. But you mentioned plans. We all know plans are great, but accountability is where things often, well, fall down. How do companies ensure there's real accountability for actually implementing these DEI strategies and making progress?
That's exactly right. That's the rubber meets the road moment. The research points to a few key practices here. One is appointing a chief diversity officer, a CDO, ideally someone who reports directly to the CEO or maybe the chief HR officer. That sends a clear signal, right, that DEI is a central leadership priority, not just a side project. Similarly, things like DEI councils can be valuable, but they need teeth. Their members need real decision-making power and resources to make change happen, not just be advisory.
So leadership structure matters. What about beyond that, for like enterprise-wide accountability?
Yeah, beyond the leadership setup, establishing robust metrics is absolutely key. And we need to think broader than just representation numbers, simple demographics. Strategic metrics should look at how employees move through the organization. Promotions, opportunities, retention across different groups. Track who's using benefits and development programs, measure engagement levels across diverse segments. You can even bring in stakeholder metrics, things like customer satisfaction across different customer groups, or the number of contracts you have with minority-owned suppliers. Getting that level of data really fosters transparency and commitment. It lets you build DEI strategies that are actually data-driven and therefore much more effective.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned earlier this idea of bundling for impact, enacting sets of practices. That really stood out to me as potentially game-changing. Can you dive a bit deeper into why that bundled approach is so much more effective, especially when it comes to financial performance?
Yeah, it's one of the most fascinating findings, I think. The study, particularly the one on credit unions, found that the biggest performance gains didn't come from any single DEI practice operating alone. It was all about how different practices were combined and layered together. Individual practices might hit specific DEI targets, sure, but they often weren't enough by themselves to really move the needle on the financials.
So the synergy is where the magic happens.
Exactly. These DEI practice bundles, they're essentially sets of complementary actions that reinforce the company's overall commitment and help achieve those broader goals, like developing employees or boosting engagement. The research actually identified 8 key bundles. Things like strategy, governance, goals and tracking, recruitment, selection, career development, employee groups, and even supplier diversity.
8 bundles.
Okay.
But was there a specific combination that stood out for financial impact?
Yes, there was. And this connects everything back to the strategic integration we talked about. The study clearly showed that companies strong in the strategy, governance, and goals, and tracking bundles, those foundational structural elements, had significantly higher net incomes and returns on assets, higher than companies focusing on other bundle combinations. It seems these 3 work together, almost like a core engine. They weave DEI right into the operational fabric. They shape who you hire and develop, they motivate actions aligned with the strategy, and they provide that crucial feedback loop on performance through measurement. It creates this powerful synergy that's actually quite hard for competitors to just copy.
Wow. Strategy, governance, goals, and tracking. That's a really clear takeaway. So wrapping this up, what does all this really mean for you, our listeners? I think this deep dive really underscores that DEI isn't just about ethics, important as that is. It's a genuine strategic imperative. It can directly impact your company's bottom line, its financial health, and its competitive edge, but only when it's approached intentionally. It requires that deep integration into core strategy, real accountability through empowered leaders and solid metrics, and that amplifying power you get from bundling complementary practices together.
Absolutely. The key takeaway, I think, is that understanding and implementing DEI strategically isn't about ticking a box or meeting some external pressure. It's fundamentally about building a stronger organization, one that's more innovative, more resilient, and ultimately, yes, more profitable.
So let me leave you with a final thought to maybe chew on. If this strategic approach to DEI, especially focusing on strategy, governance, and measurement, is so strongly linked to better financial performance, what are the hidden costs? What are the competitive disadvantages for those organizations that don't manage to adopt these kinds of integrated strategies? Something to think about as you navigate the business world